I let them build the whole thing, every post, every panel, every drop of concrete, 4 feet into my land, and I didn't say a word. Most people think that means I didn't notice, or worse, that I didn't care. But I noticed everything. I just knew exactly when it would matter. My name's Daniel Mercer, and I've lived on the same piece of land just outside a small town called Red Hollow, Tennessee for a little over 12 years now. It's not much to look at from the road, just a modest one-story house, peeling paint on the shutters, gravel driveway that crunches loud enough to announce anyone coming up. But the real reason I bought it was the back lot. That stretch of land behind the house runs long and narrow into a wooded corridor that most folks around here barely even register. It's the kind of place that looks like it belongs to nobody, until it suddenly matters a whole lot that it does. There's a line of old oak trees back there, tall, stubborn things that have probably been standing longer than anyone in Red Hollow has been alive. Their roots push up through the soil in these slow, rolling ridges, like the land itself is breathing. And for as long as I've owned the place, and from what the previous owner told me, long before that, there was this old rusted wire fence running along the boundary. It wasn't pretty, not even close, but it was real, and more importantly, it matched the recorded property line down at the county office. Now, I'm not the kind of guy who obsesses over boundaries. I'm easygoing. Keep to myself. Wave when I see you. Help you out if your truck won't start. But I do believe in one simple thing. What's mine is mine, and what's yours is yours, and we don't cross that line unless we talk about it first. That's why when the new neighbors moved in, I paid attention. Their names were Kyle and Rebecca Lawson. Late 30s, maybe early 40s, the kind of couple that shows up with a U-Haul, 2 SUVs, and a very clear idea of how things are supposed to look. Within the first week, they'd already replaced their mailbox, painted their front porch, and had landscapers trimming hedges like they were preparing for a magazine shoot. I remember standing at my kitchen window one morning, coffee in hand, watching them pace their backyard, pointing, measuring with their arms, talking in that low, focused way people do when they're planning something big. At first, I didn't think much of it. New people, new energy, that's just how it goes. But then one afternoon, I noticed something that didn't sit right. There were survey stakes, bright orange plastic tops, stuck in the ground along the back line. Now here's the thing. I knew those stakes. I'd seen them before, years ago when I had my own survey done before putting in a shed. They weren't random. They marked something official, something recorded. And the next day, they were gone. Not moved, not adjusted, just gone. Pulled clean out of the ground and tossed off to the side like they didn't mean anything. I remember walking out there that evening, hands in my pockets, just kind of taking it in. The dirt where the stakes had been was still loose, fresh. I crouched down, brushed my fingers through it, and I felt that little shift in my chest. Not anger, not yet, more like a quiet alarm going off somewhere deep. I didn't march over there. I didn't knock on their door. Instead, I waited. 2 days later, the excavator showed up. Big yellow machine, loud enough to echo through the trees, tearing into that narrow wooded strip like it had something to prove. I stood on my back porch, watching as the bucket clawed into the earth, ripping through roots that had been there longer than any of us. Clay and soil turned over in thick, heavy chunks, leaving behind this raw brown scar where the ground used to be soft and uneven. Kyle was out there the whole time, hands on his hips, sunglasses on, nodding like a man approving his own vision coming to life. At one point, he caught me watching and gave me a little wave, casual, friendly even. "Just cleaning this up a bit," he called out over the noise. I nodded back, didn't say anything, because at that point, I still wasn't sure how far he thought that bit extended. Over the next couple of weeks, it all came together fast. Too fast. Posts went in first, thick cedar beams set deep into the ground, each one locked in place with fresh concrete. Then came the panels, clean, straight, perfectly aligned. The kind of fence you'd see in a catalog, something meant to say privacy, order, ownership. And I'll give them this, from a distance, it looked good. Real good. But I didn't look at it from a distance. I walked the line. Slow, deliberate, step by step, the way you do when you're counting something that matters. And by the time I reached the far end, I didn't need a tape measure to know. That fence wasn't sitting on their land. It was sitting on mine, by about 4 feet, give or take. Now here's the part people always ask me about. Why didn't you stop them? Why didn't you say something right then and there, before they poured the concrete, before they finished the job? And the honest answer is, because once something's finished, it becomes real in a way that half-built things never are. People fight harder for what they've already paid for, already sweated over, already believe belongs to them. So I let them finish. I watched as the last panel went up, as the workers packed up their tools, as Kyle stood back with Rebecca beside him, both of them admiring that clean, straight line cutting through the edge of my property. And that night, sitting at my kitchen table, I finally made my move. Not loud, not dramatic, just precise. I picked up my phone and called a licensed surveyor. The guy I called was named Harold Finch. Older man, steady voice, the kind of person who doesn't waste words because he doesn't need to. I got his number from a friend who used him years back in a boundary dispute that got just messy enough to teach people a lesson. When Harold picked up, I didn't ramble, didn't accuse anybody of anything. I just said, I need a clean, official survey done on my back property line, and I need it documented like it might end up in front of a judge. There was a pause on the other end, not awkward, just thoughtful, and then he said, all right, I'll bring the iron pins. That right there told me I'd called the right person. He showed up 3 days later in an old white truck that looked like it had seen every county road in Tennessee at least twice. No logos, no nonsense. Just equipment in the back and a man who knew exactly what he was doing. We walked the property together first. I pointed out the new fence, kept my tone neutral, didn't editorialize. Harold didn't react much, just nodded once and started setting up his tripod like a surgeon laying out tools before a procedure. What struck me most was how methodical he was, no guessing, no shortcuts. He worked off the recorded plat, cross-referenced markers, measured angles I didn't even understand, and every so often he'd stop, adjust, recheck. At one point he looked over at me and said, "You're right not to say anything yet. Not, you're right about the fence. Not even close. Just that one sentence, and somehow it carried more weight than anything else he could have said." By late afternoon, he was ready. He drove the first iron pin into the ground at the corner near my shed, solid, deliberate strikes of the hammer echoing through the trees. Then he moved down the line, second pin, third, each one marking something permanent, something that didn't care about opinions or assumptions. When he finished, he walked me along the line, real slow, letting me see it for what it was. That cedar fence, that clean, expensive, brand-new fence, was sitting a full 4.2 feet inside my property at its deepest point. Harold didn't dress it up. "It's not even close," he said. "This isn't a gray area." A week later, he handed me a 14-page report, stamped, signed, mapped out in a way that made it impossible to argue without looking foolish. Photos, measurements, coordinates, everything tied back to the recorded deed. It wasn't emotional, it didn't accuse, it just told the truth in the most boring, undeniable way possible. And that's exactly what I needed. I didn't go next door with it. I didn't knock, didn't wave the papers around, didn't try to have some neighborly sit down. Because by then, I'd already seen how they operated, pulling stakes out of the ground like they didn't matter, building first, figuring it out later. That kind of mindset doesn't respond to conversations, it responds to consequences. So I took the report, made copies, and filed a formal encroachment complaint with the county zoning office. The woman at the desk barely looked up at first, just slid the paperwork toward her, flipping through it with that practiced indifference of someone who's seen every kind of dispute you can imagine. But then she got to the survey, slowed down, flipped back a page, then another. Her expression didn't change much, but I could tell she'd shifted from routine to attention. "You're asking for an official review?" she said. "Yes, ma'am." She nodded once. "We'll send someone out." 5 business days later, they did. The field officer's name was Marcus Bell. Younger than I expected, maybe mid-30s. But there was something about the way he carried himself that told me he didn't get pushed around easily. He introduced himself, shook my hand, then asked me to walk him through the situation. Again, I kept it simple, pointed out the fence, mentioned the survey, handed him a copy. He didn't rush. Marcus walked that line the same way Harold had, slow, precise, checking measurements against the deed, against the pins, against the reality of what was in front of him. At one point, Kyle came out of his back door, clearly noticing someone official on the property. "Hey, what's going on?" he called out, walking over with that same confident stride I'd seen when the excavator first showed up. Marcus turned, polite but firm. "County zoning." Just verifying a boundary concern. Kyle glanced at me, just for a second, and I saw it. That flicker. Not fear exactly, but awareness. Like a man realizing a game he thought he understood just changed rules on him. Well, we had a fence put in, he said, gesturing behind him. It follows the old line that's been here forever. Marcus nodded slightly. We'll confirm that. That was it. No argument. No escalation, just process. An hour later, Marcus closed his notebook, looked at both of us, and said, I'll be filing my report this afternoon. 3 days after that, the notice arrived. Official letterhead, clear language, no room for interpretation. The fence was determined to be an unlawful encroachment onto private property. The owners of the structure, Kyle and Rebecca Lawson, were ordered to remove any portion of the fence that crossed the legal boundary at their own expense within 30 days. I remember holding that letter in my hands, standing by the window, not smiling, not celebrating, just feeling that quiet sense of inevitability finally land. But of course, that wasn't the end of it. 2 days later, there was a knock on my door. I opened it to find Kyle standing there. No sunglasses this time, no casual wave. Just a tight jaw and a piece of paper in his hand. You went to the county, he said, not really asking. I filed a complaint, I replied calm. He let out a short breath, somewhere between a laugh and frustration. You could have just come talk to me. I looked at him for a moment, really looked this time, and said, you pulled survey markers out of the ground before you ever said a word to me. That hit. I could see it. That old fence has been the line for years, he shot back. That's how it works. Use defines boundary. I shook my head slightly. Not when there's a recorded survey that says otherwise. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. We've already talked to a lawyer. Adverse possession. You might want to look that up. There it was, the shift from neighbor to opponent. I didn't raise my voice. Didn't need to. You do what you think you need to do, I said. So will I. He stood there for a second longer, like he wanted to say more, then turned and walked back across the yard, that confidence from before now, just a little bit thinner. A week later, I got a letter from their attorney. Strong wording, lots of legal language, references to long-term use, implied boundaries, community norms, the kind of document meant to intimidate more than it actually proves anything. I read it once, then handed it to Harold. He skimmed it, chuckled under his breath, and said, they're hoping you don't know the difference between a claim and a fact. What's the difference? I asked. He tapped the survey report. This is a fact. The county didn't budge. The deadline stood. And as those 30 days started ticking down, the air between our two houses changed. No more waves. No more casual hellos. Just silence. Thick. Deliberate. Like both sides knew something was coming, and neither one was backing down. By the time the final week rolled around, I started noticing something else. No contractors. No movement. No sign that they planned to take that fence down. And that's when I realized they still thought they could win. By the time that final week hit, you could feel it in the air, that quiet kind of tension that doesn't need words. Their yard stayed still. No trucks, no workers, no sign of anything being taken down. The fence stood there like a statement, clean, straight, expensive, and completely in the wrong place. I remember standing out back one evening, leaning against the old maple near my porch, just watching the line where their cedar met my land. There's a strange thing that happens when you know you're right. Not, I think I'm right, but documented, measured, stamped right. It doesn't make you louder, it makes you quieter, more patient. And patience, as it turns out, is a dangerous thing when the other side mistakes it for hesitation. The deadline came and went on a Sunday. No calls. No apologies. No attempt to fix anything. Monday morning, just after 9, I got a call from Marcus. They didn't comply, he said, straightforward as ever. We're escalating enforcement. I didn't ask what that meant. I already knew it wasn't going to be subtle. Tuesday morning, gray sky, the kind that hangs low and makes everything feel heavier than it is. I heard the first truck before I saw it. Deep diesel rumble coming down the gravel road, followed by another, then another. I stepped out onto the porch just as they pulled up. County vehicles. A contractor crew behind them. Equipment trailer. Tools. It wasn't loud at first, just organized. Efficient. Kyle came out of his house fast, like he'd been waiting for this moment, but still hoping it wouldn't actually happen. Rebecca followed a few steps behind, arms crossed tight, face already set in that expression people wear when they know they've run out of moves, but aren't ready to admit it. "What is this?" Kyle demanded, walking straight toward Marcus. Marcus didn't match his energy. Didn't need to. "You were issued a removal order," he said calmly. "You didn't comply. The county is proceeding. You can't just come in here and tear down my property," Kyle snapped. Marcus tilted his head slightly. "It's not your property." That line, it landed harder than anything else that morning. There was a moment, just a split second, where everything could have gone sideways. Voices raised, tempers pushing forward. But the crew didn't stop. They'd seen this before. Disputes, arguments, people trying to stall the inevitable. One of the workers fired up a jackhammer, and that's when it became real. The first crack of concrete echoed across the yard, sharp, final. They started at the far end, where the encroachment was deepest. Post by post, panel by panel, that beautiful cedar fence began to come apart. Hal stood there, jaw tight, watching every piece get pulled out of the ground like it was taking something out of him with it. At one point, he looked over at me. Really looked this time. Not like before, not confident, not dismissive. Just searching. "You really went all the way with this," he said. I didn't step forward. Didn't raise my voice. I just nodded once. "You built all the way into my yard." He let out a breath, shook his head like he still couldn't quite believe it had come to this. "It was 4 feet. 4 feet of my land," I said. Silence sat between us for a second, heavy, undeniable. The crew kept working. Concrete footings got broken apart and hauled out, leaving behind raw, jagged holes in the soil. The panels stacked up off to the side, still in good condition, still usable, just no longer where they weren't supposed to be. It took most of the day. 47 feet of fence gone. By late afternoon, the line looked different. Not clean, not finished, but honest. You could see the scar where everything had been torn out, fresh dirt, uneven ground, reality reasserting itself. Marcus walked over to me before he left. "They'll need to rebuild it within their boundary," he said. "At their expense." I nodded. Understood. As the trucks pulled away, the yard fell quiet again, but it wasn't the same kind of quiet as before. This one had weight to it, consequence. Over the next couple of weeks, they brought in a new crew. No shortcuts this time. I watched from a distance as they measured carefully, double-checked the iron pins Harold had driven into the ground. Nobody touched those markers now. Nobody questioned them. They built the new section of fence exactly where it belonged, not an inch over. I heard through a neighbor that the extra cost ran them about $6,200, labor, materials, removal, all of it. I never asked. Didn't need to. The day they finished, Kyle was out there again, same spot as before, hands on his hips, but the posture was different. Less ownership, more acceptance. We didn't talk for a while after that. Weeks went by, then months. Eventually, one evening, I was out front working on my truck when he walked over. No tension this time. No edge. "Fence looks right," he said. "It does," I replied. He nodded, glanced down the road, then back at me. I should have handled that differently. There it was. Not dramatic, not emotional, just honest. "Yeah," I said. "Probably." A small, tired smile crossed his face. Lesson learned. And that was enough. We never became friends, not really. But we got back to something close to neutral. A nod when we pass. A hey now and then. The kind of understanding that doesn't need to be spoken out loud. Out back, those iron survey pins are still there. They're not pretty. Just small pieces of metal driven into the ground. But they don't move. They don't get ignored. They don't care about opinions, assumptions, or what something used to be. And that's the thing about property lines. They don't shift just because someone decides they should. They don't bend to confidence or money or how good something looks when it's finished. They just wait. They wait for someone to check, for someone to measure, for someone to stand still long enough to let the truth catch up. Now I'll say this, if you've got a neighbor building a little too close to your line right now, don't guess. Don't assume. And definitely don't wait until it turns into something bigger than it needs to be. Get it surveyed. Because once that concrete sets, you're not just dealing with wood and nails anymore. You're dealing with pride, money, and people who don't like being told they're wrong. And trust me, that gets expensive. But here's the part I'm still not sure about. Maybe you'll see it differently than I do. I could have walked over that first day, when I saw those stakes pulled out of the ground, when the excavator hadn't even touched the soil yet. I could have said something simple. "Hey, I think you're over the line." Maybe they would have listened. Maybe none of this would have happened. Or maybe they would have done it anyway. Maybe they needed to see it fall apart to understand it was never theirs to begin with. So I'll leave that to you. Was I right to stay quiet and let it play out the way it did? Or should I have stopped it before it ever got that far? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read more of them than you'd think, and I'm curious where you land on it.